All he wanted was a fire to warm his body, food to fill his belly, and a bed to rest his weary limbs. He gazed at the wooden signs hanging above him in the gloom, the stuffed pigs and wheat sheaves suggestive of inns and bakeries, and longed for the journey to be over. "Not far now, Peter," said Fust, as if reading his thoughts. "We are almost there." Letting out a long, silver breath, Fust cut across an empty square towards the lanes and alleys that criss-crossed behind the market like fractured glass. His footsteps scrunched the snow. Peter did not move. Each of his muscles was mulishly reliving the agonies of the trip. From Paris they had tramped to Strasbourg, and then, not finding what they sought, headed northeast towards Mainz on the banks of the river Rhine, a journey of almost 400 miles. They had avoided the obvious river routes. The vineyards on the surrounding hills were too exposed, the towns too meddlesome, but kept to the hooded woods and vales, which were nearly impassable this winter. Peter did not believe in spooks or spectres, both of which were rumoured to dwell off the beaten track, but he was disturbed by Fust's constant need for secrecy. What was the man not telling him? Peter cupped his hands over his mouth and blew into them, hoping to ignite a spark of feeling in his fingertips. Surely they were meant for finer things than this. Little more than a month ago, he had been studying at one of the most distinguished libraries in Europe, the Library of St. Victor in Paris, where he was learning the art of calligraphy from the best scribes. He had developed a fine, graceful penmanship, and was proud of his achievements, copying missals and other religious books by hand. He liked to think that he wielded the quill with the finesse of a sword, drawing ink, if not blood. But then Fust had arrived, changing everything. A ghost from the past, Fust had promised Peter riches, power, anything, so long as he fulfilled a few simple tasks and chose to follow. He even pledged the hand of his daughter, Christina, in marriage, in return for the boy's allegiance. How could he refuse? Peter spat on the ground and scowled into the night, rubbing the spots where the blisters had formed on his hands. A rope had been looped around his waist and secured to the sledge behind him, which, like an ox, he had to drag through the snow. It was his yoke, his burden, his part of the agreement. Peter Schöffer of Gernsheim was no better than a beast. As if the provisions and blankets weren't heavy enough, there was a formidable chest to lug around. Loathsome monsters were engraved on its wooden panels, scaring away even his inquisitive fingers. Still more frightening were the 2 snakes, cast from black metal, which twisted round the lip of the lid. Their heads were entwined so as to form an ingenious lock. One false touch, Fust warned, and their fangs would release a poison so venomous it would paralyze him forever. Peter shuddered. Could this be true? Fust spoke mostly in riddles, partly to bewitch the boy, but also to safeguard his secret. Inside the chest was a material so rare, so exquisite, he suggested, that it would bring the whole world within the scope of their hands. It held an eye to the future and a tongue to the past. All they required was a means of harnessing it, a way of reading its prophecies in the form of a living, breathing book. That was why Fust needed Peter. Peter shook his head. Now they were nearing the end of one journey and beginning the next. He was having second thoughts. What if this book was a mistake, like Eve's decision to bite the apple, an attempt to gain forbidden knowledge. What if he was putting his very soul in jeopardy? Servitude in life was one thing, but eternal damnation another. Sensing Fust waiting for him by the mouth of one of the alleys, Peter muttered an oath, strained against his harness, and began once more to drag the heavy load behind him. He grunted like a workhorse. There was no turning back. His choice had been made. The snow, falling more thickly now, swiftly and silently filled their tracks, so that no one, rising early the next morning, could tell from which direction they had come or where they had gone. Instead, the citizens of Mainz opened their eyes to a pristine world, a glittering, snow-covered city that hid the mounds of dung from view. They were too dazzled by the spectacle, the surface of things, to sense the peril that had arrived under the cover of darkness. Only I knew differently. As usual, I was peering up at the moon from the small casement window in the workshop on the corner of Christophstrasse. Despite the snow, its pocked face shone through the clouds, and I watched, mesmerized, while snowflakes fluttered blackly against its luminescence before settling on the ground in drifts of perfect white, a stunning alchemy. Above the rooftops rose the shadow of the cathedral, as watchful as heaven. My master had not noticed the dip in temperature, nor the diminishing light, but was absorbed in the finicky craft of invention. The other workmen had retired for the night to the dormitory at the top of the house, but he had pulled a stool closer to the fire and was busy tinkering with a complex piece of metal. Using a sharp tool, he scraped away tiny scrolls of brass from the edges of a mold. A perfectionist, he was making ever more minute alterations to the equipment, so that each piece of type he created would transfer exactly the right amount of ink to the paper he had imported from the mills upstream. Barrels of ordinary stock were stored beneath the stairs, while finer reams of rag paper from Italy, which he preferred, were kept alongside the expensive animal skins which he was going to prepare as vellum. Each night he tried to convince me that we were one day closer to our dreams, but I was no longer so sure. The money he had invested in the printing press, a much-guarded secret, was swiftly running out, and what remained of his gold was turning to sand between his fingers. Besides, I was content the way things were. The room crackled with warmth, and the sounds of my master's industry were all the company I needed. It was a far cry from my past. Just then I sensed a bundled-up figure lurking outside the church on the opposite side of the street, and pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to distinguish its shape. A lump of shadow had detached itself from the main porch and was staring in my direction. "Are you moon-gazing again, young Endymion?" said my master, making me turn round. "Come, I need your fingers." I nodded, then glanced back at the window. The figure had gone. Breathing on the thick swirl of glass, I drew a face in the moon of condensation, and turned back to my master before the smile could fade. "My hands are too clumsy for this work," he sighed, as I crouched beside him. His fingers were scored with scars, and his skin coated in a soft silvery sheen from the metals he used, lead, tin, and just a touch of antimony, that most poisonous element, which gave his pieces of type their bite. Black, inky blotches had settled on his knuckles like flies. I took the magnifying glass from the table and held it out to him. His face was streaked